2 years ago, I lived with my younger brother on the East Coast. For the most part, though, we didn't really go out much. I mean, we'd hang out with friends a lot and get food or whatever, but we never really went out and did anything interesting. I started to look up things to do, and one of the most common suggestions was camping, because we were right along the Appalachians. I told my brother, but he didn't seem very interested. A couple of days later, I went out and bought a few things, like a small tent and some safety tools, then packed up one of my old backpacks and drove out to a nearby trail. Yes, I was really inexperienced, and going camping alone was not a good idea. But I'd only planned to be out for one night, so I figured, even if there was a problem, it wouldn't be so bad. After an hour of driving, I got to the trail. No other cars were parked, and I didn't see any other people. I got out, put on my backpack, and walked to the trailhead. It was thin and not a really well-made path, but it was good enough. I don't think it was a popular trail. I just found it by scrolling through a huge list and choosing one that wasn't too long. As I hiked down, though, it became more and more clear how little used this trail actually was. Bushes were overgrown and blocking the way, and even in some portions the grass had grown in and made it really hard to tell what was the trail and what wasn't. But after an hour, I made it to the end. The camping ground was about what I'd expected. It was small and mostly overgrown, but there was something I noticed right away that caught my attention. A pile of logs on the other side of the campground. I walked up to it and saw that flakes of charred wood were blowing off in the wind, so it had to have been used recently, maybe even the night before. I looked around again, not seeing any tents or signs of someone being here. Though unsure about it, I went to the other end and put my things down, then got to work on the tent. It wasn't that late yet, so I took my time to make sure it was well made. Once I was done, I took a breather, sitting down and chilling for a bit. There was about an hour left of sunlight, and I spent it eating and sitting inside the tent on my sleeping bag. After a while, I could tell the sun was setting. But soon after, a sound came from somewhere nearby. A crackling sound, like from a campfire. I unzipped the opening and stepped out, being immediately faced by a man sitting across the campsite right next to where the half-burnt logs were. He was older than me, probably in his 40s, but there wasn't much else I could see from the little amount of sunlight coming in through the trees. He was already looking right at me, so I nervously waved my hand at him. The man waited a few seconds, then lifted his hand as well. I went around to the back of my tent, got a pile of sticks, and made a small campfire. It only took a few minutes before it was mostly dark out. There was only the light from my campfire and the man's campfire on the other side. I kept looking over, trying to see if he had a tent or a backpack or something, but all I could see was him. Every time I looked, I only got more weirded out and uneasy. Where did he even come from? My tent was set up right next to the trail, so I would have heard him walk up, unless he came from the other side, which was just empty woods. I sat out there for at least an hour, probably 2, and never saw the man move from his spot. He just sat by the fire, looking forward. Eventually, I went inside my tent, figuring I had to be overthinking all of this, and the man was probably just another camper. He was at a public camping ground after all. I laid down and tried to rest, but I don't think my mind would let me sleep for some reason. So I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint crackling of the man's campfire. I was in there for probably another hour before I heard leaves slowly crunching, making their way toward my tent. I sat up and listened more carefully until I could see the shadow of the man standing on the other side of the fabric. My whole body froze watching him just stand there for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then his shadow started moving away as I heard the leaves crunch into the distance. I quickly unzipped the tent and looked out. The campground was empty. The man was gone, having left only the burning logs. I started to panic pack, shoving the tent into its holder and even breaking some of the rods just to move faster. I left without ever seeing the man come back. As for what happened out there or what was going to happen, I really don't know. Way back in 2013, I was 22 years old and wanted to sell an old computer I had. It wasn't good enough to take into a shop or anything. It was kind of a piece of junk, but I thought someone else could find use for it. At the time, Craigslist was the only place I really knew of where you could post and sell things. And honestly, I'd never heard of anything bad happening from it. It just seemed like an easy access site where people nearby could get discounts. I trusted the area I lived in too, so I really had no second thoughts when I listed the PC. It only took a day before I received an email from someone willing to pay the listed price. Assuming it worked, as I said it did, I assured him he could test it out when he picked it up, and we set the exchange for the following morning. He said his name was Cameron, and that he'd send me an email when he was on his way over. The next day, I got up early and waited until 11 a.m., which is when he was supposed to show up. I was expecting an email saying he was coming, but he never sent anything. By 11:15, with still no email or signs of him, I decided to just open up the blinds and watch TV, keeping an eye outside just in case. There was nothing until about 11:45. From the corner of my eye, I saw a car slowly coming down the road and up to the front of my house. They stopped right at the curb, keeping the car running. Thinking it was them, I paused the TV and waited. But several minutes passed, and the car didn't move or turn off. Then suddenly, they just turned back onto the road and drove away. I got up and went to the window, looking at the road, just really not understanding what that was. I didn't know if it was Cameron or just some random person who coincidentally stopped there. I closed the blinds and sent an email to Cameron asking if he was still coming, but there was no response. After an hour, I was done waiting. I just went on with my day and forgot about the whole thing. I had lunch, eventually had dinner, and then got in bed early, around 9 p.m., because I had to work the next day. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up sometime later. I looked at the clock. It was only 11 o'clock. It had barely been 2 hours. I closed my eyes again and tried to get back to sleep, but a very faint thump forced my eyes open. I just lay there quietly, waiting to hear another, so I could figure out what it was. Only a moment later, it came again. It was coming from somewhere downstairs, but it wasn't a sound I'd ever heard before. I had no idea what it could be. Worried there may be a problem with the house, I got up and went into the hallway, then over to the stairs. I heard it several more times as I made my way down. It also started to get louder, much more than just a quiet thump. I slowed down, stepping quietly through the kitchen, and turned the corner into the back hall. As I stared down the dim hallway, another thud rang through the house, directly from the end of the hall. When my eyes adjusted, I could see the faint outline of a figure moving outside the window. My heart stopped for a second. Then, another heavy thud shook the glass, causing me to jump and step back. The figure stood still and faced the window. Then, the shadow slowly became clearer as they leaned their face close, pressing right against the glass. And that's when their eyes locked onto me. That moment of horror felt like it lasted for minutes, but I know it was only a second or two before they quickly backed up and sprinted away. I ran and called the police, but they had obviously gotten away by then. Despite it seeming like an easy case of it being the guy from Craigslist, Cameron, it wasn't that simple. There really was no evidence of it being him, other than it happening on the exact same day I was supposed to meet him. I don't know what they wanted either, but the bolt holding the window down had divots on the outside as if they were trying to pry it out of the window seal. I never found out anything else, but I also never used Craigslist again. I was working late at the office one night. We have a big 2-story building in a business complex, and sometimes if we have to catch up on work, we kind of have to stay late. I had taken 2 sick days the week before, so I really had to get my project done and didn't have much time left to do it. I planned to stay a few hours this night, and a few hours the next night to get caught up, leaving anywhere between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. Often, others would be there late as well. But this night, it was just me. I was working at my desk, which was in the middle of a whole room full of desks. As I typed away on my laptop, though, I started to get a little drowsy. After fighting it for a bit, I got up to make some coffee in the break room. I started the machine and leaned against the table, barely keeping my eyes open as it slowly poured into the mug. But a sudden thud shook me awake. It sounded like it was downstairs, but it was really loud, resonating through the whole building. Nothing followed the sound, though. It was just that one thump. I walked over to the doorway and looked out at the stairs, debating whether or not to go see what it was. Honestly, I was so tired I thought it had to just be something falling in one of the rooms downstairs, and chose not to investigate. I grabbed my mug, went back to my desk, and continued to work. I sat there for an hour, nonstop working, but the coffee really wasn't fixing my sleepiness problem. I kept working though, trying to power through it, but I was only prolonging the inevitable. At some point, I dozed off at my desk. When my eyes opened, I remember being immediately irritated and somewhat dizzy, like I'd been annoyingly woken up from a deep sleep. As I regained my senses, though, I noticed a sound coming from somewhere in the building. It was a beep, sounding every 4 or 5 seconds, but it was very faint. I looked at my laptop and saw it was nearly 2 a.m. I decided it wasn't worth trying to work anymore. So I packed up my things and brought them with me as I left the room, both to check on the beeping and to leave right afterwards. As I got to the stairwell, though, the beeping started to make me nervous. I'd never heard it before, and there was something eerie about it. Maybe I was just too tired before to fully comprehend it. I walked down the staircase, and now, with the beeping much louder, I peered into the long main hallway. At the far end, there was a metal rod laying on the ground right in front of the open entrance door. I felt blood rush from my face, knowing it should be locked up, and realizing the beeping was from the building's security system. With nothing but instinct to go off of, I ran down to the opposite end of the hallway and out the back door, getting in my car to call for help. Although I was safely out of the building, what I learned next was far more terrifying. The police pulled in and searched around, not finding anyone or anything. And that's when we checked the security cameras. At 11 p.m., a man could be seen walking up and breaking the door open with a single hit from some kind of tool, creating that loud bang I heard while getting coffee. He then quietly moved around the first floor and came up to the second, where he walked into the office I was in, and stood quietly only a few feet behind me while I was working at my desk. He then went back downstairs, coming up again while I was sleeping, and walked around the whole office, even going right up to me and searching around my desk. It's not clear if he stole anything, as there weren't cameras in every single room, but there didn't seem to be any obvious answer as to what he was doing there. After seeing those security tapes, though, I've never stayed alone at that office again. I'm 26 years old, and this year I finally settled on a house. I've been living with roommates for almost 8 years, and seclusion is something I really value. So buying a home for myself was a huge achievement. It was in a neighboring town about 2 hours out from where I used to live. This town was much smaller, with way fewer buildings. The neighborhoods weren't full of close-together rows of houses. They were spread out, separated by fields of trees and grass. The home I bought was no exception, being modest and on the less expensive side of the market. It was out in a forest, a few miles away from the town's market center. On the day I moved in, I still hadn't met anyone in the area, not the neighbors or the townspeople. With the house being so far out and trees blocking the surrounding views, it really felt like I was moving into the middle of nowhere, completely alone. Saying it like that makes it sound eerie, but it wasn't all that comforting of a thought either. I had a rental van for the day, so I got to work right away unloading my things as quickly as possible. I tried to put pretty much everything right in the living room rather than sorting it as I went. This took a few hours, and the sun was coming down just as I was finishing up. I set down a few boxes inside and started walking out to the driveway for the last couple of things. But I was caught completely off guard by a man standing on my porch, almost blocking the front door. He startled me, making me jump a bit before I tried to shake off the embarrassment and ask what he was here for. The man, looking about 50 or so, smiled and introduced himself as my new neighbor. I said it was nice to meet him and forced a quick smile, but I couldn't help but think about how I never saw him walking up the driveway. In fact, I had no idea where he came from, given it was just forest around my house. The man stayed there, just kind of looking at me for a second, then turned and walked off my porch. I stood there and just soaked in the strangeness of the encounter. After a moment, though, I stepped back outside and quickly got the rest of the boxes into the house. I checked the windows to make sure the man was gone. I didn't see him anywhere, so after a minute, I went out and got in the van, driving it down the long dirt driveway. It had only been a few minutes since the man had left, yet I didn't see him walking as I drove down to the main road. There were no other paths that I was aware of, so this made me a bit more uneasy. Anyway, I returned the van, got a local taxi back home, and started unpacking. I wasn't working fast because I was already tired and it was late, but I wanted to get some of the furniture put together before calling it a night. I grabbed the pieces to my bed frame and lugged them into my bedroom, beginning to piece it together. Before a sudden knock interrupted me, I stopped and listened, kind of shaken by it. I got up and quietly walked to the front door. I kept the door shut and locked, but looked out the peephole and saw the exact same man from during the day. But this time, something was off about him, more so than before. His body was shaky, with his head moving around in this uncanny way, but his eyes were fixed entirely on the doorknob. He was staring at it intensely, standing close to the door as if waiting eagerly for me to open it. "Hey, it's your neighbor. Can you open the door?" he yelled, and then knocked again. I still remained on the other side, just watching through the peephole. his face began to show frustration and anger, and he banged on the door one more time. He then turned and faced the pitch-black forest. Looking out into the darkness, he held his hand up and did some sort of waving motion, followed by him running out into the forest in the exact direction he waved at. Terrified, I immediately called the police, but it was too late for them to be found and questioned. After that night, though, I never saw the man again, even to this day. I've now met my actual neighbors, and of course, none of them were that man. Nobody in town seems to recognize him from my descriptions either. I don't know who the man was signaling to in the forest, or even how many people could have been out there waiting for him to gain my trust and get me to open the door. What would have happened afterward, I believe, is best left unthought of.